let's talk a little bit about Wednesday's windstorm that we had. And on Wednesday, we ended up seeing winds that were gusting upwards of 95 to 105 kilometers per hour. Just to give you perspective, if you were to compare it to the winds that are gusting out here right now, those are close to about 45 kilometers per hour. So here was the recipe that we had. Those strong winds because of the tight pressure gradient and that intense storm with those winds gusting 95 to 100 kilometers per hour. You had trees, the ones that have the leaves or the needles on it, added surface area. So basically, if you were standing outside in the wind and you put your arms out, you notice you get caught by the wind a little bit more. Well, that's what those needled trees do. And we also had a saturated ground on top of some frozen soil. And just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about here, take a look at this picture. Those are tree roots, and you see some standing water there because the top, say 6 or 8 inches of the soil is loose and wet where the roots are. But below that, it's still frozen, so it acts like concrete, and that water just pools, makes those tree roots a lot looser. So when you saw the trees coming out of the ground where the soil came up like we did during the day on Wednesday, those ones were from all of the trees that have the needles, that added surface area there. So those are the ones that got caught up in the wind and then they pulled their roots up. Well, we saw some other damage as well. Those were due to the leafless trees, and those leafless trees that we saw were basically only suffering broken tree limbs, or they were diseased or rotted, and they ended up seeing basically those tree trunks getting snapped. Like this tree that we saw out in toward East York, where the center of it was basically rotten. Even though there weren't any leaves on that tree, it was still strong enough winds to affect those leafless trees. So we have an aging canopy here across the area, so even though we aren't into sort of full spring mode where the trees have put a lot more leaves on there, if they did do that, if we were a little later into the season and we had more foliage on those trees, the damage with that intense storm system would have been a lot more destructive than what we saw on Wednesday, if you can imagine that.